Art, while Jerry's calling up the screen. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for being here for this very important discussion on this California legal option known as medical aid in dying. I'm Amy Yaffe. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and my first MAID case was at the beginning of 2019. And in the years since then, I've been at the bedside of 72 patients as they've passed peacefully following the ingestion of an aid in dying medication. I want to say that the name of the law is the California End of Life Option Act, and it's often referred to by some institutions as EOLOA for short. It's also known as medical aid in dying, and the acronym for that, MAID, is MAID. So you might hear different terms, but they're all referring to the same thing. Next slide, please. Okay. So California was one of the first states to pass a law aimed at providing compassion, autonomy, and dignity at the end of life. The law was passed in 2016 and then it went into effect at the beginning of 2017. And it grants qualifying individuals the right to voluntarily ingest a medication that will end their life in a dignified and peaceful manner at the time of their choosing. I do want to say that this is not the same as euthanasia. It's also not to be referred to as assisted suicide or suicide in any way. Euthanasia is typically when somebody is administered often a medication, typically by IV, with the intent of ending their life. That is not legal in the United States, although it is a legal option in Canada and parts of Europe, in the Netherlands, and in other areas. But in the United States, the medication needs to be self-ingested. And it's also written into the law that this is not to be referred to as suicide. Suicide is something that takes place within typically the context of profound psychological suffering, whereas medical aid in dying is a choice by a terminally ill individual about how to experience a peaceful ending of a life that is already coming to a close. And the medication simply offers the patient control over the manner and timing of their final days. I want to mention too that medical aid in dying is a personal, private, and confidential decision. It's not something that people are required to tell friends and family. It can be kept just to themselves and their prescribing physicians. Also on the death certificate, the cause of death that's listed is a person's underlying diagnosis. And finally, life insurance is not impacted by a person's decision to choose medical aid in dying. Next slide, please. So who is eligible? A person accessing medical aid in dying, they must be at least 18 years of age. They must be a resident of California. They must have a terminal diagnosis with a prognosis of 6 months or less. They must be mentally able to make their own decisions, able to self-ingest the aid in dying medication, and be making this decision voluntarily, free of coercion. And these criteria provide a clear legal framework to identify who is eligible and also to protect vulnerable individuals for whom this would not be an appropriate option. And next slide, please. What are the benefits of being on hospice when choosing medical aid in dying? So I strongly believe that anybody who is accessing MAID should be on hospice for several reasons. The first one is we can help patients decide when and if MAID is even right for them. Our training is specifically focused on end-of-life care, and we're especially equipped to help people prepare for the best death they can possibly have. And that's whether it's due to medical aid in dying or a natural passing. Second, we can have very open and honest conversations with people about their fears, their concerns, and what they hope the end of life can look like for them. End of life conversations in general can be very sensitive and often difficult to have. And so it's our job to help guide and support patients and their family members through this process. It might mean simply helping people to understand why their loved one is even considering MAID in the first place. It can involve life review, working to resolve unresolved issues, sharing meaningful memories, or finding ways to say goodbye. Third, we help to manage symptoms at the end of life. And the benefit of this, other than the obvious, would be that if someone's considering medical aid and dying, they might have an added urgency because of the pain that they're experiencing. So if we can make them more comfortable, it can buy them more time and they may not feel the need to take the aid and dying medication as soon. And finally, we help to monitor the window of opportunity as symptoms progress. And what I mean by that, the window of opportunity is the time frame when a person is still able to communicate their wishes. They're alert and coherent enough to be able to say they would like to take the aid and dying medication now. As symptoms progress, patients often experience increased confusion. They might be sedated from pain medication, and they may lose their ability to clearly express their wishes. And so when it comes to medical aid and dying, only the patient is able to make that decision for themselves. A power of attorney, healthcare proxy can't do that for them. And it can be that a patient's doctors, their family members, even their hospice team, everyone is aware what their wishes are. But when it's time to take the medication, they need to be able to indicate that, yes, they want to take the medication now. The hospice team also monitors a patient's ability to swallow. A common end-of-life symptom is dysphagia or difficulty swallowing. And signs of this could be coughing or choking when a person is trying to take in food or liquid. It can lead to aspiration if someone is taking in food or liquid and is really unable to swallow effectively. So these are important conversations we need to have with patients so that they're fully informed every step of the way and that they can make decisions about if and when they would like to take the aid and dying medication. And I also want to say that swallowing is not the only way to ingest the aid and dying medication. If a person is really unable to swallow safely, or they're having symptoms of nausea and vomiting that are difficult to manage, or some other reasons that the swallowing would be a challenge for them, we can use a rectal catheter for a patient to self-administer the medication. So it's the same kind of catheter that goes into the bladder, but it would be inserted rectally and the medication would be absorbed by the rectal mucosa. The medication is drawn up into a syringe connected to the tubing of the catheter, and the patient just needs to be able to physically depress the syringe in order to administer the medication. And again, that's what sets this apart from euthanasia. This is a self-administration. Also, if a person has a G-tube, we can access the G-tube to administer the medication or to connect the syringe that way, and the patient would just need to depress the syringe. Okay, next slide. So how to choose the right hospice agency if a person is considering medical aid and dying. So I always encourage people to ask the following 3 questions. The first one is, do you support a patient's right to access medical aid and dying? And I think that's a pretty low bar. I would hope that at the very least, the agency would support a patient's right to access this legal option for themselves. The second question is, will your doctors write a prescription for the aid and dying medication? So if somebody comes to us from, let's say, UCLA or Kaiser, It could be that they already have their medication in hand. That is definitely not the norm. Typically, a person's already on hospice when they want to begin the request process. So if the hospice's medical director does not write the prescription, then the patient needs to somehow identify a physician who would write the prescription and try and get an appointment with that physician. And all of these things take time and effort. There is one local practice, it's called LA Patient Advocates, that can help people who are having trouble accessing a team to help them with medical aid and dying. It's a private pay situation. The fee is, I think, around $4,000. So it's a lot of money, and ideally, a person would not have to pay so much for this legal option. But of course, it is good that this exists for people. I also have helped people who have been out of the service area of our hospice agency, or they don't want to switch from the team that they've been working with. The third question I encourage people to ask is, will your staff stay in the room when a patient ingests the medication? Some hospice agencies have a policy that prevents their staff from being present on the day of death. Others have a policy where the staff needs to step out of the room at the time of ingestion. I personally think that's pretty scary and maybe even a little bit dangerous because patients and families need a lot of support, education, and reassurance at the time of ingestion. I also don't think it's a really great idea for, you know, people to be handling and mixing the medication themselves, especially during such an emotional and stressful time. So I would say if the answer is no to any of these questions, maybe consider choosing a different hospice agency. Some families end up scrambling to transfer their loved one to another hospice agency in order to honor their end of life wishes. So sometimes a person will ask the hospice agency, do you support medical aid in dying? And the agency will say yes. And then when it's time to facilitate the process, the agency will say, well, we support you, but we can't help or facilitate you with this in any way. And so then a lot of times then they will find our agency, and that means they have to now leave the team that they have a relationship with, come over and meet all new hospice team members. The durable medical equipment needs to be switched out to another agency. We need medical records. I mean, it's definitely what we do in these situations. But when you are going through a time like this, it does create unnecessary stress during an already challenging time. Okay, next slide, please. So what is the request process and timing? The process requires a direct conversation between a patient and two separate physicians. One of the physicians would be known as the attending or prescribing physician, and the other one is considered the consulting physician. The patient must make two requests with the prescribing physician, separated by a waiting period of at least 48 hours. A couple years ago, the law was updated to be that 48-hour time period. Before that, it was at least 15 days, which was really quite a long time. So the physicians are assessing the patient's understanding of their medical condition, an appreciation of the outcome of ingesting an end-of-life medication, awareness of the full spectrum of treatment options available to them, that they can change their mind at any time, and that they're making this decision voluntarily. So in going through the steps here, what it would look like for me is I would make a visit to see the hospice patient. And during that visit, I would call our medical director on FaceTime. And then that patient would have a direct conversation with the doctor. I also would have with me a written request form for the patient to sign and it to be signed by two witnesses. And this form is a request specifically for an aid in dying medication. One of the signatures can be by a family member, and the other one could be by anybody else. So I could be that second witness signature on the form. And that form I give directly to the pharmacist or a copy of it. So at least 48 hours, I go back again and we do the exact same thing, another FaceTime call with the medical director. And then generally on one of my scheduled visits, I'll do a FaceTime call with another physician who would be the consulting physician. Sometimes a patient has one of their treating physicians who already knows and has a relationship with them who is willing to play that role. And they really just need to sign the consulting physician form and get that back to me. Surprisingly, a lot of physicians don't know much about this and they don't want to be involved, and they will just bow out and say, I'm sorry, I can't do that. So then once all of those things have happened, I'll drop off the prescription at the compounding pharmacy. And the one I use is called Regency Pharmacy in Newbury Park. There are surprisingly very few pharmacies that are willing to fill this prescription. So I am thankful to Regency Pharmacy. They also have the best price for the medication. It's either $415 or $465, depending on whether we do the standard formula or a high dose formula, which is necessary to consider in some situations. So I always tell people, and I want to mention insurance does not cover the medication. And Medicare does not cover it because Medicare is a federal insurance plan, and this is a law that's only legal in certain states. So I always encourage people to start the request process early, even if they're not sure that they would ever actually take an aid in dying medication. The reason for that is a person's medical condition can change unexpectedly. It can happen, and sometimes does, that a person makes the first verbal request and then they have a change in condition where they're no longer able to verbalize their wishes to make a second request. Or they've made both requests, or by the time the medication gets to them, it's really not an option for them to take it. And when these things happen, typically family members feel very badly that they were not able to help their loved one achieve this sort of a passing. But obviously, it's completely out of their control. There's nothing that they could have done. And in those instances, hospice will just continue doing what they would have been doing anyway to achieve comfort. But a person can go through this whole request process and never decide to take it. So that's why I say if a person is considering it, to just go ahead and start the process. Sometimes the prescription will just sit at the pharmacy and maybe it won't be filled. Or maybe the prescription will be at home and the medication is like stuck in a cabinet somewhere, just that they know that it's there if they choose to use it. Okay, next slide, please. So how to plan for the day of death. There are a number of decisions that a person has to make in this process. Obviously, some of them are quite challenging. One decision is how to choose a date. For some people, they might make these decisions based on their symptoms. It could be that someone says, when my pain is so high that it's difficult to achieve comfort with the medication, that's when I would want to take it. Or when I need so much medication that I'm sleeping all the time, that's when. Some people might choose to say that when I can no longer get to myself to the bathroom on my own, that's when I want to take it. It could even be a person that might say, if I need to be on oxygen around the clock, I would want to take the medication then. And then they end up on oxygen around the clock and they feel like, well, it's actually not so bad. So any date of death is always, I say, written in pencil. It can be moved earlier, it can be moved later, it can be erased entirely. Nobody is ever stuck to anything that they say when it comes to this. Another way that people might make a decision about the date is based on life events. Maybe there's a wedding coming up in the family in the next couple weeks that a person really wants to be able to make it to attend that wedding. I had one woman who really wanted to see her favorite women's basketball team play in this final game. I think it was a college team, and it was like a really big deal that they had made it to that game. And so it was important to her to watch that. And for some people, they make this decision based on their frame of mind. You know, by the time someone gets to this point and or is on hospice, oftentimes they've gone through a very difficult diagnosis, a lot of testing, perhaps surgery, chemo, radiation, many doctor's visits, perhaps hospitalizations, and they are just done or they are just plain tired of all of this. And that's okay too. These are all very personal decisions, and they're not to be judged by anyone else how a person would make this decision. Another category of decisions would be, who do they want to have present there at the time of taking the end of life medication? A lot of times people will say just their immediate family is present with them. I did have one man who the house was filled with people, there was food, there was music, it was a big celebration. And when it was time for him to take the medication, we went into his bedroom with his wife and his two daughters, and he took the medication there with just them present. Sometimes a patient might say they don't want anyone there other than myself and the nurse. They don't want anyone to know, not even their family. And I had one man who it was just his neighbors there with him because that was his family. So another decision is, where do you want to physically be when you ingest the medication? For some people, it's their favorite chair, often a recliner. People tend to spend a lot of time in their recliner chair. It is very comfortable. You can elevate your feet. I had one woman who chose to be in her backyard under her favorite tree, and the weather was very beautiful that day. A lot of times people are in their bedroom, often in a hospital bed. It's where they are safe, where they are most comfortable, and their family can gather around them in their bedroom and at bedside. And I always ask people if they would like to listen to music. Music has such a special energy about it. It creates connection. It brings up memories. It can kind of put people in a certain mindset. And so some of them that stand out is, I had one woman who chose Frank Sinatra. She drank the medication, and when she was done, she and Frank at the exact moment sang together, "I Did It My Way," and then she fell asleep. It was very peaceful. Another woman chose to listen to John Denver. And interestingly, a lot of his songs have to do with going on a trip. There's I'm leaving on a jet plane, take me home country road. And I remember her daughter saying, "Mom, I didn't even know you liked John Denver." So this was new information for her daughter, even if at this point in time. And recently I had a woman who chose Pink Floyd, and she was listening to Comfortably Numb as she drank the medication. And her family said that that is like very appropriate for her to make that choice. Next slide, please. So on the day of death, and this is a little bit more of the medical angle of things. So we don't want anything to interfere with the absorption of the medication. So there wouldn't be anything to eat for at least 5 hours in advance. Often we do it at the beginning part of the day. So after dinner, after a person has gone to sleep for the night, they just won't have anything to eat when they wake up the next day. Clear liquids are okay. Nothing with dairy, nothing with carbonation, nothing with pulp. Um, and then an hour beforehand, there are two pre-meds that need to be taken. One is Zofran to prevent nausea, and the other one is Reglan, which helps with gut motility to help process or move the medication through the GI tract. And when the patient's ready, I would mix the powdered medication with about a quarter of a cup of liquid. And it is a diluted fruit flavored syrup that I get from the pharmacist. The medication is 5 separate drugs that are combined in a powdered form. They are digoxin, diazepam, morphine, amitriptyline, and phenobarbital. And 2 of those medications put a person to sleep. And the other 3 are cardiac meds. They create arrhythmias. The heartbeat becomes irregular, and ultimately the heart will stop. But the patient is already in a very deep sleep when that happens. The patient really needs to drink the medication in about a minute's time. That's not difficult because there isn't a lot of it, but it does not taste good. It tends to be bitter and it can kind of burn the back of the throat. So we always will have a popsicle. So the individual will take some of the popsicle. It helps to sort of cool and numb the throat down a little bit, drink the medication and more popsicle after, or some breaks of popsicle in between sips. But it's not the sort of thing that you would want to take a sip and then set it down and start talking, because we wouldn't want someone to fall asleep before they've been able to finish the medication. And typically a person will fall asleep in about 3 to 5 minutes time. Okay, next slide. After the medication has been ingested, the person is in a very, very deep sleep. Their loved ones are around them. Often they're holding their hand, maybe stroking their head. And I say it's a time for reflection, for processing feelings, and preparing for their loved one's passing. It's sort of a sacred time in my mind. Their loved one is there, they're peaceful, they're comfortable, they're sleeping. So they're still present, but they're not going to wake up. And it's sort of an evolution of feelings that takes place during that time, a kind of a coming to terms with what has just happened and all of that, the things that have led up to this moment. So when the family is ready, hospice will call the mortuary of their choice. Mortuaries usually give a window of about an hour and a half to 2 hours before they arrive, depending on where they're coming from. Next slide. And these are some really good resources that I wanted to include. The Academy of Aid in Dying Medicine does a tremendous job in educating bedside clinicians. There are training videos, instructions, CEU courses. There's a journal put out by the Academy, a doctor-to-doctor hotline, a pharmacist-to-pharmacist hotline. There is a way for a patient who's looking for a physician to find somebody who would be able to work with them. Then Compassion and Choices has been around a long time. They do a lot of education and advocacy work, and they played a huge role in the End of Life Option Act passing in California and in the laws passing throughout the country. And then End of Life Choices California is a volunteer organization. There are different chapters in different states. They also help people find participating hospice agencies or practitioners that can help them. They have volunteers who can attend on the day of death and assist with mixing medication and things like that. And then 2 films, these are both documentaries, and they provide a very realistic way or realistic view of what the experience can be like for patients and their family members. One is The Last Flight Home, and the other one is Jack Has a Plan. And I do want to mention that we're up to 14 states now where this is legal in the United States. And I'm going to list them because sometimes people ask me and I don't have them memorized, so I have them written down. California, Colorado, Delaware, Hawaii, Illinois, Maine, Montana, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Oregon, Vermont, Washington State, and Washington, D.C. And New York was the most recent state to make this legal. And then the last slide. That's my contact information. I'm going to answer questions, but after this is over, if somebody thinks of something and or we didn't get it answered today, feel free to reach out and I can definitely answer any of those questions. So now I
Um,
can see everyone's face. Hello, hello.
we did have one or two questions in the chat. One person's asking, wondering if the patient has allergies to any of these medications or alternatives used, or is it not relevant since they are dying?
Yeah, that's a fair question. If a person has an allergic reaction to the medication, it would not interfere because it would take some time for that to present itself and the person would already be in a very deep sleep. And these medications are at such high doses that it would not be any reason to not take the medication. And you wouldn't really want to switch regimens because this is a very well-researched regimen that's used. And I'll say the doses of these medications are extremely high. Like if a person is on morphine, they might be on 0.25, zero point 0.5, maybe 1 milligram of a morphine tablet. And the morphine in this medication is 15 grams, which is 15,000 milligrams. So these are really high doses.
Another person asked a few questions. Are there ever legal ramifications for the MD or the pharmacy? There's three questions in this, so that's one question. Um,
I can answer that one first. No, the law actually is very protective of the process. Everything is a clear legal framework to prevent anyone from being held liable in any way. So a patient needs to make a written request for the prescription. They need to be able to make their own decisions, and it's a legal option. So the doctor writes the prescription, and every step of the way, there are conversations making sure that the patient still understands what they're asking for and that they're aware of the consequences. Doctors are not required to participate. It's written in the law that any bedside clinician or prescribing physician has the right to bow out. They don't need any justification or explanation. They can just refer to another practicing physician. I think the only case that there ever has been is one in which a person was denied the right rather than any legal action taken for a person receiving the end of life medication.
Right. And then the second question was, why would a patient need a high dose medication versus a regular dose? And how would the patient know which medication is needed?
Yeah. So the patient wouldn't know. It would be up to the people who, well, up to the prescribing physician, really. The high dose is something that we would use if it seems like it might be a prolonged passing. Passing from the medication can take 20 minutes, 45 minutes, 2 hours, maybe 4 hours on like the higher end. There are some conditions in which it could be a prolonged passing beyond those like 4 hours or so. That could be if a person has absorption issues, if they have GI cancers, if they have a history of a lot of exercising, a really strong heart, even if it was in the remote past, like even, someone is an Olympic swimmer when they're in their 20s and now they're in their 80s, that still is going to come with them and their heart is strong and it could take a longer time for them to pass. Or if somebody is has a very high tolerance of opioids, then also it can take longer. So in those instances, we would use the higher dose. But the patient does not need to know which one is right for them. Their doctors are responsible.
Is it always peaceful? So like they get, because I mean, I've seen a lot of other deaths, so they may be spitting up or they may be jerking or so like with this medication, it may take a while, but they do like go to sleep and eventually the heart stops. And it's because for me, watching somebody die can be like the worst part, over time. So they take this and it may be hours, but they're pretty much asleep. It's just waiting for the heart to stop.
That's right. They fall asleep in a matter of minutes. Sometimes there will be like one big breath, sort of like that. And I always prepare people that that might happen. And then it often like will happen kind of right after I've said it. Um, it could be that there might be a little bit of twitching, but the patient's still asleep. It could happen that you can hear a person's breathing, um, but they're in no distress. And that's sort of why it's important to have an experienced clinician there to reassure the family they're not suffering. It's not uncomfortable for them. It's kind of uncomfortable to hear it, but
Mm.
it's something that is not causing them distress. And it's a short period of time because the passing is still in a short time frame rather than a natural passing, which can go on for, for many days.
No, I've witnessed that. So I would be having to watch somebody decline for 2 weeks or, days. So this would still, even if that was it, that would be a very peaceful passing.
Yes, and you're not needing to administer medication
Hmm.
every
And
hour. If it's
stay up all night long for days of giving them morphine and
yeah.
you have to be of sound mind. But what if, because my mom died of Alzheimer's, what if this was something I could say for myself? Like if I get Alzheimer's, there's nothing obviously that can be done. Like I could say, this is what I want if I get Alzheimer's and have a stroke. There's no way that they could do something like that. You have to be of sound mind at the time you're getting it. I mean, is that?
Right. So, neurodegenerative conditions that affect a person's cognition would not allow a person to make this decision because when they are able to express their wishes, they're not at that point terminal with 6 months or less. And then by the time they are, then they're no longer able to express their wishes. So it's an unfortunate
Yeah.
like window there, but on Compassion and Choices website, they do have what would be called like a dementia toolkit, and that allows people to specify their wishes. If I have a diagnosis of dementia, I would want to give my family permission to not feed me, to withhold this, to withhold that. So it's a nice framework that you can give to loved ones or whoever would be your power of attorney for healthcare decisions to use that. But medical aid in dying would not be an option.
And
And
these
you
can all be
can,
written. Oh, I'm so sorry, Paula. Go ahead.
I can wait too. You can get so it has to be through hospice. Like you can't go to a doctor, you have less than 6 months living in the doc. It's got to be with this hospice.
No, no, it doesn't have to be on hospice. A person can get the prescription from doctors that are not affiliated with a hospice. and they can choose to not go on hospice. It's not a requirement, but
It's hard to find doctors that
it's
will do
much,
that.
um, it's like UCLA has a program, Kaiser has a program. True, it's a challenge. Not many doctors, or let's say most doctors wouldn't. So while it's not required to be on hospice, if a person qualifies for medical aid in dying 6 months or less, they also qualify for hospice, which means you would have a nurse and a home health aide and a social worker and a chaplain, all these people available to come in and monitor how you're doing. And is it getting close to the time where you might not be able to do this and you don't really have that awareness? So, it's definitely encouraged.
And you could get this prescription, so you got it, you've done everything, and you're in hospice, and you got some, and it's at the pharmacy, like ready to go. You don't have to like pay for it and bring it home and pick a time. I'm like, can you buy it and bring it home and wait, or does it have to stay at the pharmacy, or?
All those options are available. So the prescription can be, a lot of times I will have the pharmacist hold the prescription and I tell her, I'll text you when it's getting close, or can you make it, the patient can pick it up the next day. It depends on what's going on with the patient. Um, so it's really dependent. It's not great to just have a lethal medication floating around in someone's house for months on end. So I would prefer to have the pharmacy hold it. But if it's getting close, the pharmacy is closed on the weekends and they're closed on the evenings.
Right,
So if
yeah.
it's a Thursday, maybe it's better to have it at home because something could happen over the weekend.
And what if somebody gets it and doesn't use it and they die without it?
Then we would
Does,
we would bring it back to the pharmacy. It could be
Um,
destroyed like other medications, but
right.
it's a different category. So I would just bring it back to the pharmacy.
we had another question in the chat. Is this model approved for severe mental health symptoms?
No, it's not for mental health conditions. It's only for terminal medical conditions. There is a lot. There are like ethical committees that have discussions about anorexia. And could medical aid in dying be used for a patient who has anorexia? And I think the idea is sort of by that diagnosis alone, no. But if a person's medical condition progresses to the point where they have kidney failure or something else that makes it terminal for them, aside from the mental health issue, then yes, they would qualify.
I asked that question and I have seen some research, I believe in other countries. Um, and they have like different models and different structures for those who have significantly struggled throughout a lifetime. And there's a lot of parameters. And I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that? Um,
I Yes, it's true that in other countries, people can get the end of life option for mental health conditions, um, but it's not legal here in the United States. So I just follow the law, and I just I'm just in within that framework.
that makes sense. Thank you for sharing.
Uh-huh.
You answered this question, I think, Amy. I've heard there are very few doctors that do this, but you mentioned places like Kaiser and UCLA have this program.
Yes. Part of it is there are not a lot of doctors who actually are educated on the law. They wouldn't know what the prescription is. They don't know how to do it. They're very busy in their practices. And so even those who might be supportive of it, they don't get involved. They're, frightened by, the idea of liability and things like that. So yes, but there are doctors who are connected with the Academy of Aid and Dying Medicine or with LA Patient Advocates or End of Life Choices California, so that a person who is like, I'm trying and trying and nobody will help me, they can be connected with a physician through those resources.
Doctors can't be held liable for anything with this. If the family's like, oh, she wasn't ready to go when you gave this to her or whatever, I mean.
No, because the patient is making that decision themselves.
Okay.
One person asked, can you repeat the 5 medications that are used?
It's digoxin, diazepam, morphine, amitriptyline, and phenobarbital.
And another person asked, can you ask for a syringe rather than do it orally?
So if a person wants to do it with a rectal catheter administration, instead of ingesting it with a straw in the bottle, yes, as long as they have medical, like a nurse who knows how to do it and is able to do it. So like at my hospice agency, a couple of my nurses will be the ones to do the rectal catheter administration with me. Other people might not know anything about like how to do it. So if someone says, you know what, I'm really afraid of drinking that, I don't think I could handle it, I think I'm going to gag, it's just too much for me, then yeah, that's an option.
And then one person asked, could this be used when a patient has intractable pain, but terminal status may not be within 6 months?
The law specifies it has to be within 6 months. So unfortunately, there are people who live with chronic and severe illness that is difficult to achieve comfort, but is not terminal, and that those people would not be eligible for medical aid in dying.
Many people are given 6 months notice to live and live way beyond that too.
Absolutely.
So I would think.
Mhm.
Does anybody else have any questions? You're more than welcome to unmute yourself and ask.
I'm wondering too, so if a doctor knew a patient wanted to do this, and they wouldn't say you're terminal, you're going to die within 6 months because like they didn't believe it, and they'd say, oh, you could still have a year or something. I mean, it would just be finding, I guess, doctors that understood or whatever. I can't see too many people wanting to commit suicide this way when they're not really sick or something, but I could kind of see doctors not, especially if it's a religious thing or something, giving you that diagnosis of less than 6 months, even if it was cancer or something.
Mhm. That's true. And a person who is being assessed for hospice, the hospice is going to determine whether or not they qualify based on their medical condition and their medical records. So if they qualify for hospice, and there are certain eligibility criteria that they're meeting, then they would be able to find a doctor, maybe not that one who had that opinion, that might feel otherwise.
And this isn't something that, because I've had both my parents die and stepdad, nobody's ever, you said this has been around since 2016, went into effect into 17. There's nobody that's brought this up to us like, look, this is a really horrible, awful death that they're having, and we can't control the pain, and we just can't. There is this other solution. I mean, I've never heard anybody come to us and say that, or I deal with a lot of sick people that have cancer and stuff. It's not something that ever seems to be brought up. It's like we got to go find it, or like you doing this is like, wow, I didn't know it was around this long. And I was thinking it was, I did have a client who had the prescription, so I knew, I was like, okay, we can get it, but I thought it was like a special situation. So this is out there for people to use. It's just not either talked about, or I mean, I haven't heard much about, and I've been around a lot of sick people.
Yeah, people still think that the only state that this is legal in is Oregon.
Oregon, yeah.
Yes, and that goes for doctors too, surprisingly.
Yeah,
So that's why having workshops such as this one are so important for
I
people
appreciate
to
this, yeah.
raise awareness. And then you can tell, it's like that hair commercial. They tell two friends and they tell two
Yeah.
friends and so on.
I
You
think
know?
I would lead in a little more doing these workshops though, and talking about what people do go through if they don't have this. Because it could be very scary for somebody just going, oh my gosh, you just kind of start off and go, here's what we do. I think for me, I've seen people die horrible, prolonged deaths that they were going to die. My mom had a stroke and was going to die, and we had to watch for a few weeks. So I think people going, look, there's a reason. We're not just saying, oh, we have 6 months, let's take this. It's like it's at the end and it's pretty bad. And instead of watching them struggle for weeks, it can be peaceful. I mean, I've seen my animals die much peaceful than my family members, and so I think that's how it's got to be looked at. They're are terminal, they're not coming back, and it's going to be kind of a tough death. I think that's the way to talk to, not to talk to people about it, but that's how I'm looking at it, going, look at, we went through and look at, it could have been peaceful like my dog was, where we were able to do a similar thing.
Mhm. Yeah, different illnesses have different sorts of endings, and it's not so much our role to persuade or convince anyone to choose medical aid in dying, but just to have this be included in the full spectrum of options, and then people can make their choices for themselves whether or not this is something that they would want to pursue.
But if nobody's ever seen somebody die kind of a difficult death, they may not understand how this could help, is what I would, saying. But yeah, it's tough to put it out that way.
Yeah.
We have one last question. In my practice, I have clients that have suicidal ideation at baseline and meet criteria for hospice. And when in a stable space, have asked about the right to die, how can I support them in this process, or would they be disqualified?
So I did forget to mention that in some cases, a patient the prescribing physician might require a patient to have a psychological evaluation to make sure that a person is able to make their own medical decisions, so they're mentally competent in that way. When there's question, concern, or doubt about that, but a person can be depressed and able to make their own decisions. A person can have a terminal condition and feel suicidal and be able to have all the information to make their own medical decisions. So if somebody has some suicidal ideation and is on hospice because they're dying, and perhaps there's a kind of a bleeding in to those two things together, then they shouldn't be disqualified. It should just lead to a deeper conversation.
Thank you. That's very, very helpful. I appreciate the way you're approaching this and feel like I have learned a ton today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you. It's fascinating. It's such a great resource. I really appreciate it. And I think we're going to get the slides, so that feels really exciting as well.
Oh, perfect. Great. Glad you could come.
Thank you for having me.
Just a quick question too. You said Compassion and Choices, they have a dementia toolkit, or like you said, I could get in touch with them, like
It's on their website. It's on their website, compassionandchoices.org.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. I will go ahead and send the slides and a post-workshop survey just to get your feedback. And then you will also receive a recording of this workshop once it's processed and uploaded. And then thank you so much, Amy, for your time and for all your knowledge on this. I know it's kind of maybe a taboo subject for some people, but I think it's very eye-opening to know that there is an option for people out there. And, the more you know, the more, the better decisions you can make.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you everybody for attending, and thank you, Javeria, for helping with the slides and all of that troubleshooting.
No problem. All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.